And then, you know, we did very well in England, and then finally we came here, which was sort of where we wanted to do well.
Yeah.
Because all right.
He's written more classics than most artists ever dream of, shaped the sound of a generation, created melodies that will outlive us all.
He was another man. All the girls around, they said, she got it coming.
But Paul McCartney has spent 60 years carrying secrets nobody wanted to hear.
I used to love his piano playing. I think that's where I got it from, my love of music. But what was it? The Masked Player.
The songs that didn't work, the mistakes he couldn't fix, the tracks that still make him cringe. For decades, he's been diplomatic, always smiling in interviews, praising every Beatles record, protecting the legacy. But privately, he's kept a list.
That song wouldn't be anything without that. We just came up with it. So that was the kind of pace we worked.
5 songs that haunt him. 5 moments when his judgment failed. 5 tracks he wishes had never left the studio. These aren't the forgotten B-sides or the experimental failures everyone already dismissed. These are songs that millions love. Songs that charted. Songs that became part of the Beatles' mythology. And Paul hates them. Some were forced through against the band's wishes. Others slipped past his own quality control. A few sold millions while betraying everything he believed in. And one, the most painful of all, became his most famous creation while breaking his heart. This isn't about modesty or false humility. This is about an artist finally admitting what went wrong. These are the 5 Beatles songs Paul McCartney wishes he could erase. 5. Maxwell's Silver Hammer. Some songs are cute. This one was a mistake disguised as whimsy.
He stays behind, writing 1,000 lines and then say
Maxwell's Silver Hammer was Paul's attempt at playful storytelling, a silly little tune about a serial killer with a hammer.
Yeah, tuba.
Yeah, I think I was trying to get that effect.
How do you do that?
Will you play it very short?
He thought it was clever, charming, the kind of quirky pop song that would make people smile. But everyone else in the studio knew the truth. It was annoying, and Paul was the only one who couldn't see it. The song came during the Abbey Road sessions in 1969, when the band was already crumbling. John wanted to move forward, make something raw and honest. George was tired of being treated like a sideman. Ringo just wanted the fighting to stop. And here was Paul, insisting they spend days perfecting a novelty song about murder set to a music hall melody.
And who knows who broke? You know, everyone has a theory.
I know.
Who broke it up?
John.
John did.
Yeah.
It drove everyone mad, Paul admitted years later. They hated it, and I kept pushing. The recording process became torture. Paul wanted the perfect anvil sound for the bang-bang parts, so they dragged an actual anvil into Abbey Road. Take after take, hitting metal with a hammer while the others sat there fuming. George Martin, their producer, tried gently suggesting they move on. John openly mocked it, calling it Paul's granny music.
I know, that he's got himself a good niche. Because I knew Paul would be all right. What the hell am I worried about him?
But Paul wouldn't let go. He was convinced it would be a hit, that people would love its cheerful darkness. I was being stubborn, Paul reflected decades later. I thought I knew better than everyone else in that room. The song made it onto Abbey Road, wedged between masterpieces like Something and Here Comes the Sun. And every time Paul listens to the album now, he skips past it, because he finally hears what they all heard back then. It's not that the song is technically bad. The melody is catchy enough, the production is clean, but it's hollow, a gimmick pretending to be substance, a joke that nobody found funny except the person telling it. Paul wanted to be clever and whimsical, but he ended up being neither. Maxwell's Silver Hammer taught him a painful lesson about ego and collaboration, that sometimes the people who love you enough to tell you the truth are the ones you should listen to, and that being right isn't the same as being good. 4. Wild Honey Pie. Experiments don't always need to make the album. Wild Honey Pie wasn't supposed to be a song. It was barely even an idea.
"Oh, honey pie, my position is tragic."
Just Paul fooling around in the studio for 30 seconds, looping his voice and guitar into something that sounded more like a sound effect than music. He recorded it as a joke, a moment of silliness between real takes.
We kind of just liked the way it sounded, so
Yeah.
we just put it together. It's actually a 6th
Then somehow, inexplicably, it ended up on the White Album, and he's been embarrassed by it ever since. The White Album sessions were chaotic. The band had just returned from India. Everyone was writing separately, and they decided to record everything without filtering anything out. Democracy taken to its extreme. If someone wanted their track on the album, it went on. No debates, no quality control, just pure creative freedom. Which sounds beautiful in theory, but in practice meant that jokes became permanent records. "I was just messing about," Paul said years later. "Someone should have stopped me." The song is literally just Paul repeating "honey pie" over and over with different guitar sounds layered on top. It lasts less than a minute. There's no verse, no chorus, no structure, no point. It's the musical equivalent of a doodle that accidentally got framed and hung in a museum. What bothers Paul most isn't that he recorded it. Artists experiment all the time, and most experiments belong in the trash. What bothers him is that nobody stopped it from being released. George Martin, their producer and usual filter for bad ideas, had less control during the White Album. The band was asserting independence, making decisions without guidance, and this fragment of studio nonsense slipped through. Fans have spent decades trying to find meaning in Wild Honey Pie. Some claim it's avant-garde genius. Others say it's a commentary on commercialism. Paul knows the truth. It's not deep, he admitted. It's just silly. The kind of thing that should have stayed as a private memory, a laugh between friends, not something pressed onto vinyl and sold to millions. The song taught him an important lesson about curation, that not every creative impulse deserves to be preserved, that sometimes the best decision is knowing what to leave out, that the gap between spontaneity and sloppiness is thinner than anyone wants to admit. Wild Honey Pie crossed that line, and Paul has been quietly cringing about it for over 50 years. 3. Obla di, obla da commercial success doesn't equal artistic satisfaction. Obla di, obla da became a massive hit. It charted around the world, sold millions of copies, became one of the most recognizable Beatles songs ever recorded. And Paul McCartney hates every cheerful, bouncing second of it. Not because it failed, but because it succeeded for all the wrong reasons.
Be in some box under the stairs somewhere.
Is that right?
I'll find it, 20 years from now. There's that thing Jimmy talked about.
The song was Paul's attempt at a ska-influenced pop tune, inspired by a Nigerian friend who used the phrase as a greeting. On paper, it seemed harmless. A fun little story about Desmond and Molly, market vendors living their simple lives. But in the studio, it became a nightmare. Paul insisted on perfection, demanding take after take, trying to capture some magical energy that never quite arrived. The more they recorded, the more hollow it sounded. John Lennon hated it from the first note. He called it granny music, a condescending term he used for Paul's lighter commercial songs. George found it tedious and beneath the band's capabilities. Even Ringo, usually the peacekeeper, grew frustrated with the endless repetition. "We must have recorded it 100 times, Paul remembered, and John's face got darker with each take. The song wasn't bringing them together, it was tearing them apart. But Paul pushed through anyway. He was chasing something he couldn't quite define. A hit single, maybe. Proof that the Beatles could still dominate the charts with something simple and catchy. Or maybe he was just being stubborn, refusing to admit that his bandmates might be right. Whatever the reason, he ignored their complaints and finished the song his way. When Obla Di, Obla Da became a massive hit, it should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt like confirmation of John's worst fears. That Paul was choosing popularity over artistry. That he cared more about pleasing housewives than pushing boundaries. The song's success created a rift that never fully healed. "I was trying too hard to be clever and catchy," Paul admitted decades later. "I forgot to make it meaningful." The song has no depth, no emotional weight, no reason to exist beyond being pleasant background noise. It's calculation pretending to be joy. And every time Paul hears it playing in a grocery store or cafe, he's reminded of the moment he chose commerce over his brother's respect. 2. Hello, Goodbye. Sometimes the simplest songs expose the emptiest ideas.
And I say hello.
Hello, Goodbye was released in November 1967 as a single, right after Brian Epstein died and the Beatles desperately needed a hit. Paul sat down and wrote it in an afternoon, stringing together opposites like a children's game. Hello, Goodbye. Yes, no. Why, I don't know. It was cynical songwriting at its most transparent. And it went straight to number one. The song had no story, no emotion, no point beyond being catchy. Paul knew it while he was writing it. He was constructing a product, not creating art. The Beatles had always walked the line between commerce and creativity, but this was the first time Paul openly stepped over into pure formula. Verse, chorus, repetitive hook, add some hella heba hellos at the end for flavor. Done. Next, John saw right through it immediately. He called it another of Paul's songs, with a tone that made it clear what he really meant. Manufactured, safe, designed for radio programmers instead of listeners. George barely paid attention during recording, going through the motions like a session musician hired for the day. The song required so little from them creatively that they could have phoned in their parts. I was under pressure, Paul explained years later, but his voice always carries guilt when he talks about it. We needed a single, and I gave them what they wanted. But that's exactly what bothers him now. He gave them what they wanted instead of what they needed. He chose the easy path, the guaranteed hit, the song that would please everyone and challenge nobody. The promotional film they made for it was equally hollow. The band dressed in silly costumes, dancing around like they were having fun. But their eyes told a different story. They looked tired, bored, like actors playing the Beatles instead of actually being the Beatles. The whole thing felt fake, and Paul knew it even then. Hello, Goodbye represents everything Paul regrets about his approach during that period. The moment he started writing for the charts instead of for himself. The moment he chose safety over risk. The moment he became a professional songwriter instead of an artist. And the worst part? It worked. The song was everywhere. Which only proved that sometimes success feels like the biggest failure of all. 1. Let It Be his most famous song. His biggest regret. Let It Be should have been Paul McCartney's crowning achievement. A gospel-influenced masterpiece written about his mother, who appeared to him in a dream during the darkest days of the band's collapse. Instead, it became the symbol of everything he lost control of. Everything that went wrong. Everything he couldn't save. The original version was beautiful. Just Paul on piano, his voice raw and honest, singing about finding peace in troubled times. It was personal, intimate, the kind of song that felt like a conversation between souls. But that's not the version the world knows. Phil Spector got his hands on the recordings and buried Paul's simplicity under layers of orchestral overdubs, choirs, and production tricks that turned intimacy into spectacle. I heard what he did, and I felt sick, Paul admitted years later. He fought to stop the release, argued with the other Beatles, begged them to use his original mix instead. But by then, the band was breaking up, and nobody was listening to anyone anymore. John sided with Spector. George didn't care enough to fight. Ringo was just trying to survive the chaos. And Paul watched helplessly as his song about his mother became someone else's vision. The irony cuts deepest. He wrote Let It Be as a message of hope, a reminder that even in darkness, there's light. But the song became forever associated with the Beatles' breakup, with loss and endings and things that can't be fixed. Every time someone tells him it's their favorite Beatles song, he smiles and says thank you. But inside, he's hearing what it could have been. For decades, Paul tried to get the original version released properly. He finally succeeded in 2021 with the Let It Be reissue, stripping away Spector's production and returning to his simple vision. But the damage was done. The overproduced version is the one in everyone's memory, the one played at funerals and weddings, the one that represents the Beatles' legacy. Let It Be taught Paul the cruelest lesson of all. That you can write something from your deepest heart and still lose ownership of what it means. That success and satisfaction aren't the same thing. That sometimes your greatest hit becomes your greatest heartbreak. And there's nothing you can do but live with it. Not every masterpiece feels like one to its creator. Sometimes the hardest truth is admitting when you got it wrong. Hit subscribe for more untold stories from music's greatest minds. Because honesty matters more than legend.